Welcome back to OK Hobby Time. In today's video we got a bit of everything. I'll be scratch building terrain for my new favorite tabletop game, 3D printing miniatures and a bit of scattered terrain, and then finally painting it all up. My favorite way to enjoy the hobby these days is to explore the world of indie tabletop games. It's becoming increasingly popular for these creators to offer miniature lines that can be 3D printed at home. A game I recently started playing is 1490 Doom by Buer games. You control a small Doom company competing against another team in a fight for survival. A toxic creeping fog has poisoned the ground, and the Doom company's goal is to fight amongst a vertical landscape, climbing as high as possible to outrun the fog and defend against the opposing team. In addition to the awesome art direction of the game's models, it was the world building that really caught my attention. The idea of creating tall, vertical terrain as a battlefield for smaller skirmish games is something I've always wanted to explore, and 1490 Doom is the perfect reason to do so. I'm starting off by creating the towers of my terrain board. I want 2 smaller towers and 1 larger centerpiece tower. I'll be making these out of my favorite material, XPS insulation foam. When freshly cut, these blocks look way too sharp and geometric. I want old, worn stone with lots of texture, and a quick way I'll be able to achieve that is by putting my foam bricks into a container with a few big rocks. An old container with a screw top lid is perfect for this job. I don't fill the container 100% since I want there to be room for the rocks to bounce around with the foam. A few seconds of good shaking will be all the bricks need to look convincingly like stone. This is another great reason why I like working with XPS foam. I decided to go with a brick height equal to the width of the foam to make the process quicker. This also ensured that when the bricks were stacked on top of each other, they'd all be a consistent, perfect height. It's time to start building out these towers. A nice trick is to stick an L-shaped ruler to the work surface. This will help guide the foundation of the build and ensure that it's squared up. At this stage, I'm also figuring out how wide I want these towers to be. In the game's rules, you can push models 1 inch, and if that brings a miniature towards an edge, you can potentially fall off. So I'm keeping this in mind when sizing these towers. I want standing in the middle to be somewhat safe, but anywhere else to be a potential danger. It's details like this that make crafting terrain so much fun for me. I really enjoy opening up a rulebook, getting an understanding for a game, and bringing the world to life. These days, there's just so many games to explore with constant releases from talented creators. With more choices also comes the ability to find games that suit you best. I personally look for smaller skirmish games that can be played quickly and have settings that favor narrative play over competitive. With the brick towers complete, it's time to move on to the wooden bits. This section will also be created out of XPS foam, but with some different techniques that will help create some convincing texture. I'll be using my hot wire cutter to etch in a wood grain pattern into each piece of foam. This part is a bit tedious, but I really like the deep texture the hot wire cutter achieves. This type of texture is perfect for when it comes time to paint. I'm also using a bit of rolled up tin foil to get some deeper impressions on these wood beams. This is going to create a real nice aged look to these pieces. I'm deciding to go a bit smaller with the wood planks in order to create some contrast with the larger stone blocks. If my wood planks were also big and chunky, then the whole build would risk looking out of scale. I'm using typical wood framing techniques to build these sections so the final result is even more convincing. Having an underlying frame allows me to place the planks in a more ramshackle way, including broken boards and uneven spacing. The gaps reveal the framing underneath and give the overall build a really interesting look. Using XPS foam to create bricks and wood is one of the easiest ways to get a bunch of terrain made for the table. The combinations are also endless. Different heights, widths, the amount of floors, all these options are available to adjust. So whether it's just a bunch of shorter, sprawling ruins or a few larger towers, XPS foam bricks and wooden planks are the foundations for creating great scratch-built tabletop terrain. At this point, the wooden floors and brick towers are complete and can be attached. These towers are going to be a great way to build up my board vertically. They just need some other components to bring them together and navigate between them all. In addition to my stone towers, I also want to create some wooden scaffolding. This is going to help add some differentiation once everything is together. Stone structures mixed with wooden structures help create a really interesting look. The techniques I'm using are all the same here, starting with the wooden frame then placing the planks on one by one, creating rougher layouts with lots of gaps in texture. The taller pieces are measured out and put together using wood glue with the addition of something new. I'll be using some push pins in certain structural areas to provide some more support. I usually don't use these too often as glue is often enough, but for these longer wooden sections I wanted to be a bit more careful, especially since I went a bit smaller than usual with the thickness of the wood to contrast the bricks. I'm also adding some cross beams which give the scaffolding a more realistic look and offer some actual structural support. It's always great when a creative choice also provides some function. I'm often looking up real-world references, especially for wooden structures, to see how they're framed out. The scaffolding was finished off with a few extra bricks from my towers to create some additional support and also blend the different terrain pieces together. At this point I have my towers and scaffolding and things are looking awesome. In order to push this build to the next level, I turned to my 3D printer to get some fun bits that will add some personality to this table. There's lots of climbing in this game and ladders play an important role. Doom companies can set up ladders to scale easier, use them as improvised bridges to cross gaps, and even push opposing team members from ladders in the hopes that they land in the creeping fog below. Since they play a big role, I wanted to make sure these turned out great. A go-to paint scheme for wood is to start with a darker wood, then dry brush a few lighter wood colors, increasingly focused on the edges. Details such as ropes and screws were painted. Then they were all topped off with some mossy contrast by mixing matte Mod Podge with flock. In addition to the ladders, I also printed off a set of barrel and crate scatter terrain. Pieces like this give terrain builds some great personality. They're also really universal and can be reused in just about any tabletop game. With the addition of ladders and scatter terrain, this set of terrain is looking even better. I also made this set to be compatible with some printed terrain I already had, just in case I needed to expand. And here's what it looks like with the Doom company starting to take position. Next step is to take care of all this pink. I want to quickly prime everything, and to do so I use a special rattle can primer that's safe for foam. Normal rattle cans have an accelerant that will chew right through foam and need to be avoided when priming XPS. I'm going to start with the scaffolding by applying the darkest of my browns. I'm doing this in a way that's not 100% coverage. I'm leaving out the deepest recesses and a few spots to allow the darker primer to show through. Next is the mid-tone brown, which I'll be applying plank by plank. Similar to the previous brown, I'm not covering everything with this color. This will give even more variation in texture. It's quite exaggerated right now, but this will be knocked back when the final dry brush layer is applied. I'm working on the brickwork now, starting with adding this vibrant orange color. This is being focused in the cracks and edges of the bricks and will create some really nice contrast in the end. I'm taking the darkest of my grays and layering this on top of the orange to knock it back. This midtone gray is then used, applying it in downward strokes to create an interesting texture. I'm focusing this more on top and tapering it off as I go downwards. This creates nice depth and natural shadows towards the bottom. The lightest of grays was then applied with a big dry brush and applied with downward strokes. There's a lot less paint on this brush, so it's only catching the highest points. This same technique and brush was used on all my wood pieces with a lighter brown. This ties all the browns together and creates some great weather texture. While I have this big brush out, I also finalize on my crate and barrel scatter terrain. The wood sections are finalized with some moss mixture I made earlier, creating some nice contrast across all these sections. After it's brushed on, I'm using my finger to move around the moss mixture. I'll be using my airbrush with green contrast paint to blend this moss mixture into the wood a bit more. I'm also spraying a bit of this onto the bricks to create some additional texture. A unique and fun part of 1490 Doom is that it's played on a circular 2x2 board. I was able to use my Proxxon circle jig taped to the table, allowing the sheet of foam to overhang where I had my hot wire cutter balancing at the same height. It was important that everything was secured with tape to prevent any type of movement. My usual ground covering technique was used here. A bunch of sand was glued down, and once dried, I started applying a coat of brown paint. I find that watering this down a bit helps with coverage over the sandy base. Once everything was dried, I dry brushed the base with the first of my grays. And afterwards another dry brush with a lighter gray. I then coated the entire base in glue, followed by a dusting of flock from above. The final step was to very satisfyingly paint the rim black. I love how this project turned out. I think the stonework looks interesting and grimy with a layered approach to painting, and the mossy texture on all the pieces creates a nice consistency and contrast across the board. This project is a great example of bringing scratch build to the next level with a few 3D printed bits. It's not mandatory, but I find these smaller components add some really great scale and interest to the board, adding to the overall theme and making it a bunch of fun to play on. Alright guys, that wraps up this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.